The following content is intended for a mature audience. Viewer discretion is advised. Artwork is based on but may not reflect the story at large. Please give all artists the respect and credit they deserve. Legends of Thea, Chapter 9. To say that Ham had a feeling of melancholy about him would be a gross understatement. He had truly loved Jubilee for the brief time they were together. She was kind and caring, and seemed to be so interested in his own life, dreams, and passions. He knew that they had to part ways when he was chosen as the third engineer to work upon the Pangea, and that she would remain on Earth. And yet, he found her, located on Ring 3, twisted into some awful being, a monster. Beyond that, though, she appeared to be a member of this mysterious Puritan group, a group that Ham wanted to know no more about, and wanted no affiliation with. She was a Puritan the entire time. The entire time they were together, she was something otherworldly, at least in his own opinion. He never knew it, never suspected it, not even for a moment. And with how intimately he knew not only her personality but her body, he wondered if there was any showing signs between a Puritan and a normal human being. The rail trolley they were on slowly began to enter the fourth ring. "Ham," Pangea announced. "We're going down to Ring 4 now. We should make it to the bottom in just a few minutes." She received no reply, no response, and even with his neural implant, she had a hard time detecting what he was feeling at the moment. If there were any cards in his deck, he was keeping them inside of his chest, not just close. They were still joined by the archivists, the Holy Deity, Marty Jones, and Ruby. Everyone aboard the train. Marty Jones's own personal intrigue in Ring 3 had finally been satisfied. He got a good answer for why all of the dwarves were left behind on Earth and were forced to hide aboard the Pangea if they wanted to make their way to the New World. Although he didn't entirely like the answers, he at least had them, and that was better than nothing. Pangea and the Second Throne, having such colossal bodies, were forced to lay upon flatbed rail cars, with powerful gravity plates to keep them stuck to the train and prevent them from falling. The First Throne was able to move about the cars as normal, as long as he ducked his head, and throne, down into doorways. It was difficult, but not impossible. In BO3, or Bo's case, the synthetic unit had a difficult time moving about most rail cars due to his width. Being incredibly muscular meant that he was considered a piece of heavy lifting equipment, not so much a person, and very few things were built for his accommodation in mind. But he could typically squeeze in as long as he moved sideways and tucked his tail in. Bo managed to squeeze his colossal body down the aisleway so that he could get close to Ham and talk to him in person, a luxury that Pangea did not possess. Ham was currently completely absorbed into his personal device. He was trying to work to distract his mind and prevent him from processing the deep emotions that he was currently feeling. At the moment, he was approving all of the roundabout random projects all along the ship, things that were non-crucial and did not require his personal witnessing to approve. He could do it purely through the tablet and didn't even have to look at the project details. Bo leaned in close, trying his best to gauge Ham's current emotions, but found it difficult, as Ham was not exactly displaying any. "So, how are you feeling right now?" Bo asked. "How am I feeling?" Ham repeated. "I honestly don't know. I don't really want to think about it, I suppose." "It might not hurt to talk about it a little bit," Bo encouraged. "So, do you want to talk about the giant tree lady, or just how you're feeling about learning about who you are in general and what you're doing here on this ship?" "Honestly, no. I'd rather not talk about any of that, Bo. It's not exactly a fun subject for obvious reasons." Bo took a deep breath for a moment and then folded up the table, giving him the room he needed to get in front of Ham. "Well, I'm going to make you talk about it, because if I'm your friend, I'm going to help you process your feelings, even if they're difficult to process, so let me have them. You want my feelings? Ham asked. I'm angry that I was chosen to be the third engineer. I imagine it has something to do with my apathetic nature, or maybe something to do with some of the questions I answered in that darn questionnaire that decided that I was the perfect candidate to be engineer number 3. I'm angry that there are 2 engineers above me, which means there are 2 engineers who are even better stooges than I am, who could have been even more manipulated, or perhaps that was never the goal. Maybe I'm a legitimate part of this ship, designed by humanity to actually get us down to this planet, or maybe I'm some Puritan ploy. I'm angry, Bo. I'm angry about it all. I don't get to be some giant, buff, good-looking machine that can just be something that's irrefutably useful on this ship. I have to wonder what the hell I am. And it freaking sucks. I used to be just a person. Now I'm some cog in some giant, overarching conspiracy, like some main character in a story, and I hate it. BO3 reached out and took the tablet away from Ham. Let's put this down for now, he said. Whatever's happening in the grand scheme of this world's design, it's likely something that's going to go far beyond your lifespan, and probably even beyond mine, and I'm going to live quite a bit longer than you. So why don't we just focus on your happiness in the moment, and leave all the higher-up thinking to people like me and Pangea. We can handle it. I don't know if you've noticed this, Ham, but I've developed quite an interest in the first human to ever accept the synths, same as Pangea has. And I was wondering if you were perhaps not opposed to a unique arrangement between the 3 of us. Maybe something of a romantic degree? Ham suddenly slumped forward and fell into Bo's muscular arms. Oh, I'm so happy that you're so open-minded to this. It's the gravity, you idiot, Ham said. As Bo looked about the train car, everyone was starting to succumb to the effects of high gravity. They were being pulled down to the bottom of the train car, heads on tables or fully laying down upon the floor. The only exceptions were the first throne, the second throne, Pangea and Bo himself. Even Ruby was now laying upon the ground. Gently, BO3 put Ham down onto the floor so he wouldn't fall. So, what exactly is happening right now? All of Ring 4 has double Earth's gravity, which means this train car has to produce more than that to make certain that we don't go flying through its front windshield. It's trying to keep us down against the rails. So it's exerting a lot more than double Earth's gravity to combat it. Oh, I understand, Bo said as he looked around the train car. Well, I guess we can continue this conversation when you're no longer pinned down to the floor. Of course, if that conversation goes well, you'll just end up pinned down to the floor again anyway. What was that? Ham asked. When the train car finally at long last leveled out, Ham was able to stand up. When he looked about at his surroundings, he saw what he had expected to see from the start of his journey on this ship. Farmland. Long, rolling, endless farmland as far as the eye could see. The crops were so tall he had a difficult time seeing over them. As far as he could tell, the only thing they seemed to grow was maybe tomatoes, some kind of corn, beets, carrots. His eyes started to adjust to the field. What he was seeing was almost baffling to him. Along each and every field was not just one crop, but nearly 10 or 20, all planted in rows right up against each other. It seemed rather inefficient to him. Then he thought about soil restoration and preservation. These were the kind of methods that were still to this day difficult to teach back on planet Earth, and yet they were happening right here on Ring 4. It almost brought a tear to Ham's eye. Finally, things looked like they were working the way they were supposed to. Ham didn't even know what to say about it. It didn't take long before the rail car eventually made it to its first stop. There was already a hole in the ground, accompanying a very large pile of dirt. Synths were standing all around with shovels and digging equipment. One of the synths had his body completely outfitted to be an excavator. Ham jumped off the rail car. I take it you guys are waiting for my approval, he said to the synths. They all shook their heads up and down, confirming. Ham quickly took a look inside the hole, inspected the various welds and pieces of rewiring, and then he was able to confirm that it could all be approved. Alright everybody, before we go running off to the next stop, I would like to talk about our strategy for handling this ring. So far, every other ring has turned out horrible, so I figure we might as well talk about this ring first. Pangea, if you could delight us all with a quick situation update. Well, Pangea began, we are on Ring 4. The gravity here has to be doubled in order to make up for the gyroscopic effect of having Ring 3 shut down for so long. Now we're spinning the entire ship to make up for that, and since we're in the gravity well of the planet, this ring does not need to spin that fast anymore. But we've chosen to not reduce the gravity until we can fix all the problems and communicate the change to the local inhabitants. If they're used to double gravity all the time, suddenly only having half of that could cause any manner of disruption. Even potential injuries if people accidentally throw themselves against walls or ceilings. Very good, Ham said. And is there anything I should know about the inhabitants of this ring? Oh, the elven people? Pangea began. Well, originally there were supposed to be some kind of experiment in human survival on this ring, but of course, it turns out that they were a purposeful creation of the Puritans to apparently shepherd humanity over the horizon, or be the workhorses of humanity. So I suppose they're just simple farming folk. As far as I can tell, they're very polite. They don't consider the synths living beings, they consider them machinery, but they still take very good care of us, worrying if we crack our screens or damage our bodies, and they always assure that we are kept in the most pristine condition. Apparently they regard us as a sacred creation of humanity. They seem to have adopted quite the religious attitude towards anything regarding humans. That's good to know, Ham said. Is there any danger that they pose? Are they separated into different little factions that hate each other, or when I meet them, are they going to try to skin me alive and eat me or something? Is there anything I should know about them at all? Pangea began scanning through various records. No. Anything that looks violent, well, I'm not even certain it could be classified as a war, but they definitely do fight each other from time to time. They don't seem to be hostile towards anything. They're even very kind and ritualistic when it comes to killing animals, so I don't think they'd be hostile towards you at all. The only concern is that they are about 12 feet tall, and they can exhibit pretty impressive feats of physical strength. Other than that, you should be perfectly fine. Well, that certainly sounds good to me, Ham said. Well, I suppose there's nothing left to do but just keep doing my job then. Let's head on to the next thing that needs fixed. As they traveled, they noticed that the elves seemed to honor the original intentions of the ship. Red light was still casting down from above, giving a warning for where the various city tiles would disconnect during departure. But everywhere that there was casting red light was also smooth green grass, flattened down and mowed, curated, and not farmed. There wasn't a single building upon them, nor did there seem to be any permanent structure, just a hexagonal path surrounding each and every city tile. From what he could see off in the distance, each city seemed to have a large forest about it, then a small wooded area, some kind of recreational area, and then 2 farm areas along with places for herding large animals. Production had to be very high from each one of these city tiles in order to feed the entire ship, so he imagined whatever they were doing was working very well. Vicky was relaxing upon the first throne. She was breastfeeding her child and taking in the fresh air of the farmlands around her. This is so much better than the congested city. Wouldn't you agree, Throne? The first throne softly gazed up at his holy deity for a moment. Yes. I'm undeserving of this land, but it is a beautiful land to behold. They continued their journey mostly undisturbed. Ham fixed the occasional problem, and was able to talk to some of the local synths whose jobs it were to work on Ring 4. For the most part, Ring 4 had been kept in very good condition. The elves had only minimally intervened with the ship's operation, and as far as Ham could tell, he was ready to turn down the gravity. Of course, he couldn't doing this without addressing the locals, and he wasn't entirely certain how to do this properly. As Ham was deep in thought, they eventually walked past a field that was in the middle of being plowed. Deep in the field was a large, hissing, roaring machine. The machine was what appeared to be a recreation of a road engine, a very large steam-driven machine. However, rather than a belly of a bursting fire, the entire engine seemed to be struggling under the weight of ice, of all things. It was beginning to freeze up, and everything about it seemed cold. Ham squinted his eyes, looking at the snarling machine. That's gotta be some kind of air-powered engine. I've never actually seen one that large. It's certainly interesting, he said to himself. Rather than having a crew of 3 to 4 men, a single elf was sitting on the back. Her colossal body filled up the entire cab, and she was working hard to move the various levers herself. At the end of one of the rows, the elf began to turn the large machine around. While commencing the 3-point turn, she just so happened to gaze upon the horizon and see Ham and his various group of people traveling down the roadway. She wiped her eyes for a minute as though she didn't believe what she was seeing. Then she squinted, trying to get a better look at what she was seeing off in the horizon. Without much warning, the machine died down. Its noise and snarling suddenly stopped, and the elf jumped off of the frozen equipment onto the ground below. In an impressive feat of athleticism, the elf sprinted all the way across the field, and was in no time standing right before Ham. The 2 Navy officers who had been traveling with Ham shouted out from the top of one of the train cars, "Sir, there's a local coming up fast." Ham turned back to them to look them in the eyes, while the elf was standing right over him. "Oh really? Is there? I wasn't aware of that," he said sarcastically. "Hello, miss," he said, looking up at the large elf creature now looking down upon him. The elven woman removed her hat and lowered herself down, trying to get a better look at Ham. "Well, Nary, I never thought I'd see this in my life," she said, looking at him closer. "Are you a human? For real, an actual human standing before me?" "Yes," Ham confirmed. "Well, your voice, your face. You're the person we saw in the sky just a few days ago." "That would be correct. I am Ham, captain of the ship." "The ship? This is truly a ship. It is real." Yes, I suppose so. Why, did you not think it was a ship?" "Oh no, we've always believed it was a ship, but to have one's own faith confirmed before them, it's a miracle." "Your own faith? I'm not entirely certain of what you mean," Ham said. The elven woman became excited as she placed her hands together trying to explain to Ham what she was talking about. "From childhood, I was always raised to believe that this place that we are in is not actually a world, but is in fact a ship," she explained. "A grand vessel built by ancient humans to ferry us through the stars to a whole new world. It's in fact shaped like this," she said as she put her hands against themselves and formed a ring. "We walk along the inside of it, whereas in other worlds you walk along the outside of a large sphere. We've always believed this to be the case, but had nary a capacity to prove it ourselves." Well, yes," Ham said. "That's exactly correct. We are in fact on an artificially made environment, on a ship traveling through space. I myself was one of the engineers that helped design this ship." The elf's breath was taken away for a moment. "Well, that would make you hundreds of years old." "Well, yeah, I am hundreds of years old. I was asleep for most of that time in a storage pod somewhere aboard this ship. I've only recently woken up in order to land the ship on the new world. I announced it a few days ago. We're right above the world. I just need to fix some things before we can officially land. The elf then stood up to her full height, too excited to contain herself. Would you be interested in coming into town for a moment? Just that way, just maybe a mile or two. You could say hello to the sheriff, or perhaps the duchess, or the mayor. All of them would be very interested in meeting you firsthand. You could see the way we live and the way we have been farming for humanity this whole time. Yes, I can see that you've all been very busy at farming. It's quite impressive. All of this farmland has been supplying all 3 of the other rings this entire trip. So there are other rings, the elf said excitedly. We've always known about Ring 3. Some of us have even claimed to be there ourselves, but it's rather difficult to fit inside of those human trolley things. And we know about Rings 2 and 1, but we've never seen them. It's said to be that there's a forbiddenness of traveling to them, that the humans themselves forbade us from going up there, but we're not certain why. Ham thought about it. Well, it's not so much that you're forbidden from going up there, it's more of they're forbidden from coming down here. They have huge social and economic problems that we didn't want to disrupt the farmland, if I was reading the historical logs correctly. I see. What sort of problems would humans have? Humans are utopian beings. They don't have really problems. Ham laughed out loud. Oh, humans have all kinds of problems. I can assure you of that. The elf looked closely at Ham's posture. You seem almost as though you are weary. How about you come into town as I offered, and take a rest? Ham thought about it. Well, that's probably for the best. I'll take a break, and then I can finally turn off all this double gravity, after I get everyone situated and explain what's going on. Then I can go ahead and finish the rest of the problems in normal Earth's gravity. Well, it's wonderful for you to join us. I must see to it that my human relic is put up properly, lest it be damaged. I will join you in the city. You need only go that direction. You're bound to run into it, and I can assure you they'll give you no problems. But first, I should probably let them know you're coming. The dark-skinned elven woman then reached down and pulled a clump of dirt out of the soil. She then confidently ripped a piece of her own clothing off and wrapped the piece of dirt in this cloth. Once she had it tied into a tight bag, she pulled out what appeared to Ham as a small crayon. She wrote something on the cloth. Ham couldn't see what it was, likely some kind of message. She then squeezed the bag hard, forming a tight ball in her hands, and threw it into the distance. By the holy deity, one of the Navy officers announced. He began to squint his eyes and look off into the distance. How far do you think that's going? The other Navy officer squinted as well. At the angle at which she threw it, plus the speed, it's no longer within our eyesight. I would say she just outperformed one of our main artillery guns. Holy moly, said the other Navy officer. The elf smiled and flexed her arm, impressed by their compliments. It's fantastic to meet all of you humans. I will make it to town shortly, but I must put away my relic and take good care of it. I'll see you shortly. Ham leaned over to the first throne. What do you think? Go into one of these local towns? See how friendly they are? Shouldn't be too big of a problem, should it? The first throne thought about it. I've seen no signs of hostility from these people. They present what appears to be no danger to the holy deity. Let us embark, then. They continued on forward, down the line, until eventually they made it to a junction where they could switch off and actually head towards the elven town itself. Ham wasn't expecting it, but there were a great number of people waiting to meet him there, one of whom was holding a strange cloth in their hand as they stood on the rails waiting for the train to stop. One of the well-disciplined naval officers leaned over to the naval officer next to him. That is most definitely the cloth that elf threw. Yeah, I know, replied the other officer. How far do you think that was? I have no idea, we went around, but it's gotta be outranging our furthest firing weaponry. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They were both whispering back and forth at each other. Ham overheard them, but didn't pay much attention to what they were saying. Whatever view the Navy might have had towards these elves was really none of his business, so long as it didn't interfere with ship operations. As Ham arrived to what he could only assume was the entrance to the elven town, he saw a great large number of people removing their boots and other footwear, and washing themselves before entering the town. He could also tell that the rail line abruptly ended just slightly into town. Right there was a dead stop, and as far as he could tell, there were no trains allowed even deeper into the elven city. He looked down at the roads within the elven town itself. Whereas the country roads were the typical dirt that you would expect from cheap country roads, within the town there was a highly durable moss that everyone seemed to be walking on, rather than walking on pavement. Ham looked up at Pangaea. I require exposition. Oh, Pangaea said. I believe that's what the elves refer to as roads. They walk on them to make travel easier. Ham furrowed his brow as he looked up at the large robot. I know that. Quick, run a search. Do humans walk on green roads? Pangaea quickly did a search. Oh, right. Elven belief says that a road is only complete when you no longer need shoes to walk upon it. All of the gravelly dirt roads outside the city limits where you're required to be wearing boots are considered incomplete roads. These roads are perfectly safe to walk barefoot on, which makes them complete. It's the same story for the entire elven town. If you need to wear shoes, then there's still more work to be done. Oh, well, I suppose that makes sense, Ham said. A tall elf, wearing an official-looking vest and a rather specific-looking leather hat, approached Ham while carrying the cloth. Excuse me, I'm not certain how to refer to you, I guess, my lord? Are you perhaps the human we saw in the sky, just a little while ago, a few days perhaps? Are you the captain of the ship, the elf said as it put its hands together in the form of a circle. Yes, I'm Captain Ham, he replied. It's very nice to meet you, he said, reaching out his hand. The elf quite gently reached out the other hand that was not holding the bag, and tried to gingerly grab onto Ham's hand, gently shaking it up and down. It is my greatest honor to meet you. Please, come into our town. Let us show you all that we have to offer and explain the lives that we've been living for the glory of humanity. The glory of humanity? Oh, perhaps that was the wrong phrasing. The well-being of humanity. Okay, Ham said. He looked back at Pangaea, along with the First Throne, and Marty Jones. He had an uncertain look about his face, and they shared it with him as they nodded. Something was amiss, but it was not certain what it was. To be polite, everyone that was capable of doing so kicked off their shoes and washed up just as the elves did, including their entire arms and legs and any exposed skin that they could get to. Some of the elves were changing attire, but Ham didn't have a second change of clothes to do so in, so he chose not to. The Navy officers, being ever prepared, managed to change into a dress-style uniform, different than the uniform they were wearing. You seriously carry that stuff with you? Asked Ham. The two officers of the Navy looked almost confused. Of course, it's our second change of uniform for more formal attire. Why would we not have it with us? Whatever, Ham said. The sheriff removed her rather strange-looking leather hat, and then bowed to Ham, letting her long flowing hair trail upon the ground. Let me introduce myself properly. I am the sheriff of this town, Elowin Shadowbrook. It is an honor to be in your presence, Captain Ham. Well, thank you, he said. It's an honor to be in your presence too, I guess. Seeing as you all have a sheriff, I can only then assume that you also have a mayor, am I correct? he asked the sheriff. The sheriff happily nodded. "Oh yes, we have a mayor and a duchess." "A duchess?" Ham asked. "It was only a dual-party system when we first installed the whole political party system in each city section, so I'm guessing you've expanded." Yes," smiled the elf. "I hope that's not an offense." No, it's the exact kind of thing we were hoping for when we designed the whole two-party mayoral sheriff system. We were hoping that you would install some kind of way of breaking a possible stalemate. I take it this duchess is how you do that?" "Yes," the sheriff replied. "It is our mayor's duty to make the laws, it is the sheriff's duty to enforce or veto the laws, and it is the duchess's duty to break stalemates and ensure economic stability throughout the entire town, especially in conjunction with other towns, and track our financial goals." "Ah, a financial leader," Ham said. "That's quite impressive." The elven sheriff, grasping her hat tightly, seemed to be forming an awkward question but didn't know how to ask it. "Something on your mind?" Ham asked. "May I ask, are we elves within your design? Are we performing our tasks optimally as intended by humankind?" Ham looked rather astonished. He looked back at Pangaea for some kind of answer, but she only shrugged her giant shoulders. "I don't know," Ham said. "I only worked on building this ship. Elves were never part of the plan. You must have been a recent change or adaptation to the plan. Nothing within my reasonable ability to foresee. But you seem like nice people, so I guess you're doing fine." He gave 2 shrugging thumbs up. Elowyn began fanning herself with her hat. Uncertain of how to continue the conversation, she seemed more nervous than anything else. Ham looked around at all the elves, whose eyes were clearly on him, as well as the rest of their party. Even Marty Jones had never had so many stares upon him. "If you don't mind me asking," said Marty Jones to Ham, "I would love to know more about elven culture. This book," he said, holding up an empty paged book, "is not going to fill up itself, and I have a fresh pen for it." Ham looked back in horror. "How many pens have you gone through just thus far?" "I refuse to answer that question," he replied. The sheriff, seeing that Marty Jones was writing things down in a small book, immediately took the hint and cleared her throat as she continued to lead Ham towards the center of town. "In the beginning, we elves believe that the gods made humanity in their own image, perfect beings capable of the gift of creation just as they are. With, of course, only one difference. Humans do not live forever. They have a finite lifespan and are mortal. Other than that, they are in the image of the gods. That is what we elves believe, at least." "That is similar to human belief," Ham replied. "Please keep going." "In the first era of mankind, we elves believed that humans roamed their homelands of Earth. Earth was the place that humans were created and born. It was built for them to roam freely as they saw fit, and to rule over and build as they sought to build." "That's more or less true," Ham said. He didn't wish to stample upon their beliefs, so he decided, right then and there, he would say nothing to oppose or object to what they were saying. The sheriff continued what she was saying. "Humans built massive megalithic structures, pyramids of stone and earth and wood, the size of mountains, towers that reached to the sky, all of which was in perfect contrast and harmony with nature. Mankind knew no difference between the wild animals that abound the earth and themselves. They lived in perfect equilibrium with the elements." Ham kind of gestured with his hands a bit. "Yeah, I guess that was kind of true," he said. He didn't want to trample on something that he could clearly detect was a religion, so he kept his mouth shut. For thousands of generations, the earth was a perfect paradise. It knew not the changing of seasons. It knew not the cold and the hot times, the dry spells, and the withering of crops. It was a perfect place with perfect growing conditions all year round, just as the paradise we live in today. But there was a cataclysm at some point that leveled nearly 90% of the humans' amazing structures of earth and stone, leaving them broken and unable to communicate with each other as they once did across the entire world. Getting a little bit into hyperdiffusion, but I'll go with it, said Ham. After this great cataclysm brought about the end of the first human era, a great ice age fell upon humanity, reducing its population and, unfortunately, driving its people mad, as the humans were forced to resort to any number of vile act, even cannibalism. A darkness was instilled into their hearts, a darkness that is still difficult to remove from the hearts of man. As the Great Ice Age came to its end and the earth began to heal, humans infected by the darkness in their own hearts grew mad, and even though times were now abound and plenty, they still acted as though the Ice Age was still upon them. They stole from each other, committed crimes most unspeakable even to elven kind, and they hurt each other in ways that we as elves cannot even possibly imagine. So came about the Age of Want and Desire, humans who required things that they could not obtain, could not grasp, and they did not know why they were even searching. Even if food was on their table and water was in their well, still the humans would reach for more and more. Ham shook his head up and down. So far this story's getting good. Keep going. The attempt to satiate the madness led into the great second human era. Humans that had once been able to make monumental megalithic structures of earth and stone now switched to the Industrial Revolution, and their new pieces of machinery were made of metal, iron, and steel. These machines would work for them in the attempt to quell the growing hunger and greed within them. Of course, this did not work, but for a time, they were satiated, and humans could once again be at peace, if only for a moment. The Industrial Revolution, although able to numb the pain of human madness, did not solve it completely, and the operating of these great human machines poisoned the very environment they called home. Eventually, as war, pestilence, and disease fell upon them once again, they sought a great solution: to take humans that were not yet infected with madness and cast them into the stars themselves in the hopes of finding a new utopia and perhaps a cure for the disease that had seeped into the human heart. And thus, upon that journey, we elves were created to facilitate mankind's every want and desire, and to help cure them of the madness in their hearts. We elves are the cure. This new world will be our paradise, and we will find the cure for our creators and repay their kindness in creating us, so that one day they might rise to godhood. Or at least, so we believe. Ham sat there for a second, scratching his head. They clearly had religified most of human history. "Well," he said, "that's not entirely untrue. I myself helped work on building the Pangea." The sheriff's face instantly lit up. "Then you must be a second-era human, one who knows how to handle the bouts of technology that humans are capable of. You must know the inner workings of the ship itself." "Nah," Ham said. "All I know is the gravity plates, and, no one really cares about them. They're not that interesting." As they had made their way to one of the buildings in the center of town, the elf looked almost confused as she stood there staring back at Ham. "The gravity? You constructed the gravity? I'm not entirely certain of what you mean." "Oh, well, here, let me show you," Ham said. See how I'm walking all slunched over, like I can't pick up my arms all the way and my legs look weak?" "Yes, I had noticed," said the sheriff, "but I did not want to say anything. I simply assumed you were weary of travel." "No, it's because this entire ring is in double Earth's gravity, and it's difficult for us to even stand. It's like I'm carrying a whole nother me on my back. But check this out. Pangea," he said, looking back at the large synth walking behind them. "Can you give me control of the gravity plate system for a second? I should be able to do a little something here." Ham had a visual overlay gloss over his eyes for a second. He looked for the right code and managed to enter it. Then, the gravity plate below him inverted and began expelling about 1 Earth's gravity upwards, counteracting the double Earth's gravity that was now pushing him down. "Oh, that's much better," he said, standing at his full height finally. "Feel my back crack." The gravity plate that Ham had activated was actually rather large, and many of the elves in the surrounding area were also caught up in its effect. They were now experiencing 1 Earth's gravity, normal Earth's gravity for Ham, but far less than what the elves were typically used to, especially at their large, colossal size. Many of them found that they could now leap up to the 2nd story of their own structures, and they could run much faster in this lighter weight gravity field. The lighter gravity forced Elowyn to reach out and grab onto a wooden pole to steady herself. Now, attached to one of the structures in order to keep herself upright, she looked back at Ham. You have mastery over gravity itself? Do all of the Second Era humans have this?" Ham shrugged his shoulders. "It's not as religious as you're making it sound. All I do is I control the ship with my brain, and I connect wirelessly to the..." He started looking around at the rustic town around him. "Okay, I'm now hearing what I'm saying, and I could see how it could be misconstrued as magic, because any truly sufficient technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, see," he then pointed at the large synth behind him. "See that? See that big synth over there?" "Yes," said the sheriff. "It is a wondrous creation of mankind, a servant meant to move food products from our lands to the human lands above." "Beside," corrected Ham. I'm sorry?" "The human lands are beside you, that direction, that just past the wall, and yet they carry them up into the sky. How does that work?" Never mind, but either way, that big synth lady is also the ship. That's Pangea, and we're standing on Pangea. The two are one and the same, and we are connected by our minds. I can control the ship because I can control her because we are connected, and she's also my wife, and I am just now listening to myself saying this and realizing this is probably not making anything more clear to you, is it?" The sheriff stood there staring back at him and shook her head no. "You're married to a machine? I suppose human machinery is quite impressive." Ham took a deep breath. "While I was asleep for 400 years, I was connected to the ship. The synths..." He thought about it for a moment. "The synths have souls in them. Souls made from 13 engineers that were part of the ship during its travel. And thusly, all of the synths are alive as a result of that. Does that make any sense?" The elven sheriff shook her head up and down. "Yes, humans have made the miracle of life." Ham thought about it. "Well, it's pretty accurate, so yeah, I would say we've made the miracle of life. So make sure to be really nice to them. Yes, of course, they're more than just relics of humanity. They're life, made by human hands." Pangea put her thumb up as she looked down at Ham. "I'm advocating for you, as best I can." When the sheriff knocked on the door, an uneasy elf managed to answer it. It was a servant of the mayor. "Whatever is happening? I feel as though I could easily jump above the very ceiling." The sheriff explained. Our human guests have lowered the gravity for themselves to make it easier to walk upon the ground. Please, can you welcome us all inside? Human guests? Whatever are you talking about? The maid looked out at Ham standing on the porchway. Hello, he said. The woman immediately shrieked and ran off. I must start tea. I must start tea. Please, come inside. Okay then, Ham said. He looked back at some of their larger members of their party, namely Pangea and the second throne. Sorry, ladies, you'll have to sit out here and hang out for a bit. Marty Jones can definitely come in, though. Marty Jones replied by giving Ham the middle finger. Haha, classic little guy. Ham took a look at the architecture of the large building they were now standing in. He began to recognize it immediately. I do believe this structure is built upon the old foundation of the original structure that would have housed the fabricator. The fabricator should just be a few floors beneath our feet, in fact. Yes, that's correct, said the sheriff. It now houses the home of the mayor and the duchess. They live and work here for a time while they are in office. In the case of the mayor, it's every 2 years. In the case of the duchess, it's typically a lifelong role, unless, of course, she is superseded or decides to retire herself. Marty Jones picked up on the information and began to record it. He asked Ruby to walk him closer to Ham and the elfin sheriff. Might I ask how exactly you select this duchess? Is it a born-in position? No, said the sheriff. In order to become the duchess, you need to pay a certain amount of money into funding, well, everything around us. The roads, bridges, anything that we might need that is used for community purposes. Especially things like the nursery over here. Once all of that is paid for, we figure out who paid for it the most, and they receive the title of Duchess. Marty Jones seemed almost flabbergasted. Ham, I think the elves live in a society in which paying taxes is completely voluntary, and your political weight is measured in your ability to provide for the community. Ham started to laugh. No, that can't be it. He looked up at the sheriff. No, that's fairly accurate, yes. If you build the most roads and take care of the community better than anyone else, you become the Duchess. If you make the best laws, you become the mayor. And if you are the best at respecting people and enforcing those laws, you become the sheriff. That's how it works. Ham thought for certain that someone was pulling his leg. He remembered all the political strife and drama back on Earth, just trying to build a single ship. Certainly they haven't achieved such a harmonious political system on said ship. Before Ham could ask any further questions, a door opened up, and two important-looking individuals gracefully walked in, joined by a handful of maids, all of whom were carrying things such as trays, cups, and kettles. The sheriff cleared her throat. Captain Ham, I'd like to introduce you to Sylvie Winterfell, our mayor, and Lyra Meadowlight, our duchess. Both the mayor and the duchess bowed. It's an honor to have humans grace us with your presence. They then placed their hands together in the form of a ring. What is that symbol everyone keeps making? I've noticed several elves doing it. Oh, this, they said as they placed their hands together in the form of a ring once more. This is a symbol of our faith, that we believe that we are on a spaceship hurtling through space to go to a new world. Oh, well, you know that is actually the case, right? You don't have to have faith that this is a spaceship. I can just tell you, it is a spaceship. The elven women laughed, but the meaning of what Ham was trying to tell them was lost on them. Yes, of course it is. Whatever, I guess, Ham mentioned. Now then, I suppose a proper introduction for us is in order. I am Ham, captain of Pangaea. Standing outside, is Pangaea herself. She cannot join us, for she is too big. This is Ruby, the synth that carries around this little guy, who is Marty Jones of the Archivists. Over there's the holy deity of the Archivists, some kind of god-sent deity of some kind. She has wings jetting out of her back, that's why. This is the first throne, 2 Navy guys, and a whole bunch of other people who followed us in. And together we've been pretty much making the most of it. Oh, and this big meat cake that follows me around like a lost puppy is BO3, or Bo. It's nice to meet you all. Vicky, the holy deity of the Archivists, tried to pose herself in an important fashion. She was very used to gaining the attention of everyone in the room. But as everyone in the room was equally special to the elves couldn't decide who they would look at first. For whatever reason, Marty Jones seemed to garner the most attention from the elves. I'm sorry, is this a child, right? No, said Marty Jones. I'm a dwarf. That's a type of human that's very small. They call them lesser people. No, they do not, corrected Marty. They do not call us lesser people. We're dwarves. Oh, well, it's nice to meet you, Marty Jones. And you say that this woman is your holy deity? This woman here who wears the angel wings? Ham looked over at Vicky. Oh, she's not wearing angel wings. That's not a fashion statement. Those are jetting out of her back. She can control them. Vati, Achini, whatever your name is, flap your wings, show them. Vicky extended her wings, showing that they were not just vestigial pieces of something or other she put upon her back, but instead actual limbs. Immediately the elves were amazed. Yeah, she randomly gives birth to new humans, so if you want to meet the god of your gods, she's right over there, said Ham. Sylvia Winterfell was especially amazed with Marty Jones, being one of the smallest humans that she had seen amongst them. Laura Meadowlight was especially amazed with the holy deity. She couldn't figure out as to how she flew with the wings, and was asking her many questions. Eventually the sheriff managed to round both the women up. Compose yourselves. We are in holy company. Ham here is a second-era human. He is not a third-era human like the rest of them. Both the mayor and the Duchess gasped. Third-era human, Marty Jones wrote down. You didn't explain to me what a third-era human is. Could you please elaborate? The Duchess was the one to answer. Third-era humans are the humans that were purposefully selected to board the great vessel and journey into the stars. They were the ones most unaffected by the blight that affected, well, the hearts of all mankind. But a select few number of humans from the Second Era were pure enough that although they were Second-Era humans that understood the complex mechanisms that controlled the Industrial Revolution, they were still allowed to join the stars, truly uncorrupted beings, and Ham here is one of them, right? Ham was scratching a booger that was hanging slightly out of his nose when he looked up at them. Huh? Oh, yeah, I guess so. I install gravity plates, and I'm gonna land the ship, so that's good enough, right? The elves laughed, assuming he was joking, but Ham was being quite frank. The First Throne, realizing that Ham didn't have much to add to the conversation, cleared his throat. Well, ladies, I'm certain you wish to show us a great deal about your society, and we would be happy to observe upon it and record what you have been doing down here on Ring 4 all this time. Please, let us commence. The 3 women looked delighted, and before Ham could tell what was happening, he was staring out on a large courtyard. So, what's this place? He asked. The elven sheriff began, her voice melodic alto. Here In the nursery, Ham, all elven life takes its first breath. When an elf child is born, it is the Duchess's obligation to give that child their first gift, a room all to their own. From their vantage point, Ham looked down at the courtyard and waved to some of the children playing below. They look much like human children, he observed, except, of course, much taller. Pretty certain some of these little ladies could kick my butt. Are you telling me that they never leave this nursery? Ham asked, turning back to the sheriff. Of course not, another elf replied. The world is a dangerous place. We must provide a safe environment for our children to be raised. There is, as you can see, a park here, with a playground and equipment for them to learn and exercise on. There is also their private rooms, which is provided for solitude and personal studies. And there's a small schoolhouse nearby. It's their decision whether or not they attend. Many do, though, at least 6 times a week. And you're saying their mothers just visit them? Ham inquired, a touch of disbelief in his voice. Yes, Ham, the sheriff confirmed. When I was in this very nursery, my mother visited me every single day when I was an infant, then every other day when I was a young youth, and about once a week when I was a teenager, and about once a month after I eventually moved out and began my profession as a farmer, until one day I found my love for law and order and wished to become the sheriff. Vicky, who had been observing a scene outside, pointed. An elven woman, statuesque and graceful, was gently placing an infant on a soft mat in the sunshine, cooing and playing with its small fingers. That elven baby is the same size as a human baby, Vicky commented, a hint of awe in her voice. But the elves are huge. Man, that's not even fair, she said as he placed her hands on her stomach. The elves exchanged a brief, puzzled look. Ham, still processing the information, looked at them and said, So, elves are both raised by what seems to be a communal system within the nursery, yet also individually by their mothers who visit constantly. Okay, that's a lot to wrap my head around. How exactly does this room system work? The Duchess cleared her throat. Well, it is my obligation to purchase a room for the child because the child has no ability to purchase their own possessions, of course. And their mother purchases all the items for the child's raising as gifts to their own offspring, visiting them every day until they are old enough to manage on their own, and for longer periods. When the child reaches a certain age, I purchase the room back from them, so in a way they receive a gift from me twice. Ham sat there scratching his head slowly. Yep, that definitely hurt my brain. All right then. What happens after that? Show me the next phase of elven society. The sheriff smiled. Well, of course, business owners come to talk to the children on their way out into the world, to try and recruit them for the various professions that they might be able to offer them. It's a good way to get apprenticeships started and train up dedicated workers for your business who are going to be competent and capable at the tasks you need them to do. Indeed, the Duchess added. As they mature, elves branch out into the many various professions. You could become a butcher or a baker. You could become someone who works with the human relics, owning and using them for farm work and the like. You could also become a farmer or a rancher. I have heard that term said before, Ham replied, his curiosity piqued. Human relic. Explain that. What do you mean? The Duchess smiled brightly. Come with us, Mr. Ham. We wish to show you the most important part of any elven city. They walked on into a vast chamber dominated by a colossal machine, its intricate workings humming with contained power. This the sheriff announced, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space, is the fabricator. Every city tile has one. It allows us to create our own equipment, and even means to make more equipment. A self-sustaining system of creation. The Duchess stepped forward. It is here that we craft what we call human relics, recreating them as they were originally intended during the Great Industrial Revolution. These devices, she gestured towards the ancient-looking core of the fabricator, though not made by human hands, possess the same functionality and precision. And for our current needs, she indicated to the display panel, we are currently constructing something called a tractor. A human device used in farming to plow fields, sow seeds, and harvest crops, the mayor elaborated. Yes, I'm well aware of what a tractor is, Ham replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. Of course, the sheriff said smoothly. It makes sense that you would be, but as you can see, we elves have become quite adept at utilizing human technology. We can even interface with the fabricator to request specific components, such as replacement bolts and seats. You're using this advanced machine to replace bolts and seats? Ham asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, I see. So perhaps the intricacies of human technology aren't exactly your forte. A faint blush rose on the cheeks of all three elven women. Well, the Duchess admitted, I suppose we are not as instinctively skilled with its nuances as some humans might be, especially that of second-era humans. Ham's gaze swept across the chamber. He noticed diagrams and tools laid out with meticulous precision, almost as if the elves were following a very detailed manual. It's like watching college students assemble their first piece of flat-pack furniture in their dorm rooms, he murmured to himself. Gotcha. He turned back to the elves. May I request the ability to interface with your fabricator for a moment? It would be our greatest honor, the sheriff replied immediately. Ham activated his neural implant. Pangea, he murmured, his voice low. I think you've been listening in, haven't you? A moment of silence, then Pangea's voice responding in his mind. No, I haven't had the chance, Ham. You had your neural implant offline. Why? What's happening? Oh, the elves are just not really that proficient at interacting with their fabricator. I was going to lend them a helping hand. Do you think you could whip up some basic user-friendly plans for human-like technology? Mostly simple stuff, equipment and the like. Go for things that are air-powered and straightforward. And can you go ahead and resize them for both the elves and the dwarves? Then, add all of those plans to the various fabricators around the ship. That way, they have an easy selection to choose from. Yes, of course, Pangea replied promptly. I'll start working on that right away. I'll let you know when it's done. Well, thank you, Pangea. I really appreciate done. A silent moment passed between Ham and Pangea. What? Done. I am already done. I'm adding it to the fabricators now. How did you do that so quickly? Oh, right. I gave you a prompt, you did it instantly because you're a robot. Got it. Alright, let's see what you came up with then. From beneath their feet, a deep rumble vibrated through the chamber as the fabricator roared to life. The three elves exchanged a bewildered glance. But you didn't interact with the console, the Duchess said, her voice filled with confusion. You didn't select anything. The interface has not been touched. Ham pointed to his head. Oh, I used a thing inside my brain. I basically used my mind to speak to it, if that makes any sense. The elves immediately placed their hands together in the form of a religious ring. Then they knelt down. You don't have to pray to me, Ham said, a little awkwardly. Please stop doing that. The fabricator was designed to produce any item, regardless of complexity or regardless of materials, but it was designed to create those items one at a time. It was not designed for mass production or speedy production at that. They waited in the echoing space until finally something began to emerge from the machine's output bay. "There we go," Ham said, a note of anticipation in his voice. "I wonder what it is." Sliding out was a small excavator, its design clearly based on human models, but its cab was proportionally sized to be comfortable for that of the elves. "Well, there you go," Ham announced. "A mini excavator. You can use that thing to dig holes, move the earth, all kinds of stuff." The sheriff approached the heavy metal machine. She was only slightly taller than its cab. "Technology like this, we've only read about it in fragmented human texts. Is it truly real?" "Yeah," Ham replied. "It's real. From the looks of it, this model is powered on liquid compressed air, so that should be something you already understand how to use. It's hydraulics to power the arm, has a motor that runs off that air. As long as you connect it to the city's air supply occasionally to fill back up, you should be able to run it just fine." The sheriff cautiously reached for the handle of the excavator's door. Then she opened up the cab and looked inside. "I'm not certain how to even operate this." "Well, neither am I," Ham admitted. "I'm not exactly trained on how to drive an excavator myself. Do you happen to have your passport with you?" "Oh, yes," the sheriff said, reaching into her tall leather hat. "They were distributed to us by the synths a little while ago. We just assumed they were some kind of human totem." "Yeah, well, it does more than just look official," Ham said, gesturing to the small slot on the excavator's console. "Why don't you try putting the totem into that little slot right there?" She carefully placed her passport on the indicated spot. The small screen began to slightly flicker to life. Then it began displaying clear diagrams on how to operate the excavator. "Incredible!" the sheriff exclaimed, her voice filled with wonder. "Yeah," Ham said with a grin. "You're going to want to hang on to those passports. They're going to be really useful on the planet below, especially when it comes to interfacing with human technology." "Oh yes, we will," the Duchess affirmed, her eyes fixed on what the sheriff was doing. They stood around the mini excavator for a moment. The elves who worked in the fabricator room gathered around, with expressions of awe etched on their faces. Several of them excitedly began pointing at the fabricator's main screen. "Look! Look!" one exclaimed. "We have so many new options to select from now. They're all scaled for elves." "Well, would you look at that?" another one murmured as she scrolled through the interface. "They've included a section not only for us elves and the humans, but for some different types of fae, the synths, and even the dwarves." Marty Jones's ears perked up immediately. "There is?" He leaned forward, peering intensely at the screen. Ham nodded towards the screen. "Yeah, Marty, Pangea really came through for everyone. You're going to have to say a thank you to her on your way outside of the building." "I certainly will," Marty replied, his eyes still scanning the dwarven specifications. "What other changes are there?" the sheriff asked as she leaned her head outside of the small excavator. Ham stepped closer to the console. "It looks like Pangea added some basic vehicle shapes for everyone. You know, the most fundamental farm labor stuff, excavators, tractors, bulldozers, and the like. Oh, but it looks like she also added some railway equipment here. Looks like she made certain to include broad gauge. That's got to be for the elves. And she've included narrow gauge. That's got to be for the lesser people to be able to have something more manageable to your size." Marty Jones bit his lip a little. I want to be mad about the lesser person comment, but that does sound pretty awesome. After making all these alterations to the fabricator, the elves were excited to show Ham the rest of their society. He looked at the occasional shop or place of business within the city limits, and as far as he could tell, everything was pretty much on the level. There was woodworking, crafting, blacksmithing. The elves seemed to do most of their things by hand, using very little technology, if any at all. The technology that they did use was brutish in nature. He witnessed them tooling metal parts by hand on lathes. However, the lathes were more like wood lathes, and the tools were held by hand. He wondered why they didn't just use more technologically advanced machinery, but then he remembered what he'd already seen displayed from them, and figured it best not to ask. It was when they were walking past a textile plant that he just so happened to see something out the corner of his eye. A woman standing there. This woman didn't look human at all. She had many different features from many different animals. Mostly, large moth-like wings protruding from her back, as well as a cat-like appearance in the face. "Who's that?" he said, pointing at the woman. The Duchess turned back to see what Ham was pointing at. "Oh, them? Those are just some domestic fae we have making textiles." Domestic fae? Ham could not resist his curiosity. He began to approach the moth-like creatures. Eventually, the lightning gravity field that he had put surrounding himself through the gravity plates encompassed the moth-like creatures as well. They suddenly felt their bodies becoming lighter. They could even flap their wings and float for just a moment above the ground. "What on earth is happening?" they said to each other as they began to stumble about. One of them, noticeably male, decided to flap his wings extra hard to try and gain some air and actually lift it off the ground for a moment. "I could certainly get used to this," he said. They all turned to look at Ham, a human in their midst. "Oh, well that would certainly explain it. Hello there." "Yes, hello to you too," said Ham. "It was my understanding that the Fae couldn't stand to be down here on Ring 4. What are you all doing here?" They looked at each other for a moment. "We suppose you're the captain of the ship that we saw in the sky a little while back? You were the talk of the town for an entire day or two." "Yes, that's me. I'm Captain Ham. Nice to meet you. Now, on to my question. Not everyone on Ring 3 is completely opposed to living in a society, especially when your own species starts gaining enough members to actually operate as a society." "What do you mean?" asked Ham. They looked back and forth at each other for a moment before answering. "We are the Loony. We are a sub-variety of Fae that have so many members within our own little subspecies that we can self-govern. We can even breed without the use of the forced compatibility sequence, which means that the Fae don't exactly feel comfortable around us anymore. The Fae are anarcho-libertarians, and we are starting to form our own little society with its own rules, separate and different than the rules governed by most of the other Fae, either because of biological necessity or the like. That means that we were kind of rejected. Now, we could have stayed on Ring 3 without too much of an issue. They weren't forcing us to move, but since there were so many of us, we figured we better move down here to Ring 4 to not get on their nerves. We were already starting to bump elbows, and not in a good way." Ham looked back at the elves who were guiding him through their society. They were waiting for him to finish his conversation, not moving on, but also not interrupting him. He rather enjoyed how polite they were being. "They called you domestic Fae. What does that mean?" The Loony looked back and forth at each other before answering his question. "We're basically something between a pet and a slave. They think of us as wildlife, except with some kind of supernatural quality. That's how they regard the Fae. and since they consider themselves able to commune with nature, communing with us is like communing with a wild animal. They believe that we are a domestic variant of the Fae, something that they've managed to control, but is spiritual in nature. Unfortunately, that means they completely disregard our autonomy. "That's horrible," said Ham. "It's not that bad. They're very kind and respectful to us, but they don't consider us part of their society. After we get down to the planet below, we're probably going to go off on our own. They might try to stop some of us, but there's no way they can stop all of us, and on a planet that large, we're certain we can escape them." Are the Loony the only real sub-variety of Fae that have managed to amass numbers like this? "Oh no," said one of them. "There are several others that have managed to amass such numbers that they could operate as their own individual species. But they can't really branch out until they're down on the planet below." Ham thought about it carefully. "I could do something about this, make some kind of declaration, ordering the elves to acknowledge these people as they should be acknowledged. But I've already done with that with the synths. Who knows what kind of ramifications that's going to have. As much as I want to get involved, I probably shouldn't." Ham cleared his throat and asked a single question. "Are they doing anything immoral with you? Anything against your will?" They looked at each other for a moment. Clearly they had a few things on their mind to say, but nothing that could actually escape their lips. "Not really," one of them replied. She grabbed her dress with her hands and held it up for Ham to see. "These are the textiles that they're having us make. It's made of a mix of silk from our young and fur from our adults. The process is perfectly harmless. When a young kitten is born, they're placed into a bath of warm water. They float there for a bit, and until their wings fully grow in, they're capable of producing silk from their backsides. It's perfectly harmless, we assure you. The silk is harvested and then spooled up. We use it as a product in textiles, and since we don't need to go into a chrysalis phase, we just have to wait for our wings to grow, the silk is useless anyway." "What about the fur?" asked Ham. "How is that harvested?" She held up her own arm. "For us short-haired varieties, we have it combed out. For the longer-haired varieties, they just get sheared every now and then. Honestly, the entire industry is probably something we're going to replicate down on the planet below. After we escape the elves, that is." "So you are planning some form of escape?" "Yes, of course we are. But we really don't need to plan it all that hard. If you haven't noticed, there's no shackles on us, no chains, no locks, no gates. The elves just kind of rely on us to stay put where we are, and they do a good job of taking care of us, so many of us probably don't even want to leave. There might be a thinning every now and then, some of us who desire freedom, and some of us who choose to stay. That's the thing about the elves, they're very kind masters." Ham thought about it intensely as he considered his options. "It's really not my job to dictate the morality of the people I'm putting on the planet. It's only my job to put you on the planet." He repeated this mantra to himself all the time. "So I guess I'm just going to walk away from this. If you have no problem with it, I'm just going to go upon my merry way. Best of luck to you all. You called yourselves the Lunos?" "We're the Loony," they said. "It's very nice to have met you, Mr. Ham. Good speaking." Ham shook the hands, or paws, rather, of the butterfly cats, then departed their company to rejoin the elves. He had a lot to think about. The elves were really capable of disregarding the sentience of others, simply accepting them as part of the natural world and therefore within the elven domain. It wasn't necessarily that they were trying to be cruel, just that they were trying to manage a resource they thought was within their care. That was certainly dangerous, but Ham felt as though he had no jurisdiction or power to do anything about it. They all continued to walk until the moss came to its end, and the road became dirt once more. Have you noticed our arrangement for outside the city limits? Ham looked up at the elf. Yeah, you farm out there. It's really impressive. I think you'll be much more impressive with the style of sustainable farming that we partake in. The Duchess excitedly pointed to a large thicket of trees. Please come with me. This is how the world is meant to be in its natural state, she said, pointing to all the trees with her hands. As you can see, there is nothing kept, nothing maintained. No one is fiddling with or touching anything in this land. It is wild and free. The elves that occupy this land are foresters. They hunt, they gather, and they usually operate on a lower budget. But they own the land, and above all, they protect the land from harm. They make certain that there are no wildfires, and that the bounty of the land is still fruitful. She pointed at something moving through the thickets of woods. Right there was a deer, if you could see it. Ham shook his head up and down. Yes, it's very impressive. Now I'd like to show you the next phase, she said, briskly walking down the road. Come with me. As you can see, all of these lands seem to focus and point towards the city center, and then they splay out in a sort of pattern. This is the phase's edge, where we decide which phase the land becomes in. After the old-growth forest, there is, of course, the plowing of the fields. When all of that has to be taken down, the trees harvested and moved elsewhere, and the very ground tilled up for the first planting. Ham looked on at the field. He looked at large tractors and huge creatures pulling plows, creatures that looked bovine in nature but he couldn't entirely recognize. You tore down all the trees of this land to plant fields. Why not just use already plowed land? The elf shook her head. That is just not our way, and it's not the right way of doing things. This land is fertile, and nature would have likely cleared it on its own anyway. Ham scoffed a bit. Well, we're not really in a natural environment, but if we were planet-side, you'd be correct. So, this is where you plant your crops then? For how many years? The Duchess got excited once more. We do it a different number of years depending on how the seasons go. It could be anywhere between 3 to 10 years. It's usually up to me and several others to determine when it is time to move the phases forward. And that could be a number of factors. That's a whole political debate. But we try to never cause damage by being too stagnant for too long. And it is an expensive procedure to say that it's time to move them all forward. When this land was occupied by nothing but wild growth and trees, it was the hunters and foragers who owned the land. They then sell the land to the elves who are interested in plowing the fields and making the farms. I see, said Ham. Do you rent any of the land out? The Duchess stopped her explanation and began to look at Ham as though she was confused. Rent? What does that word mean? Do you ever give the land out for a supply of money with the expectation of only using it for a short time? Yes, elves purchase the land and then they sell it to the next elf who wants it. If they have the right price, of course. Ham quickly realized the concept of renting was lost on the elf, and there was likely other earthly concepts that would likely fall on deaf ears if he tried to say them. Well, I guess that one's not going to really be explained well, but please move on. We've been through the wild growth and then the first farming session. What's after this? After the first farming phase comes animal husbandry. We have all sorts of breeds of livestock. This one particular is one of my favorite, announced the Duchess loudly. Oh yeah, said Ham, I saw that big fella pulling the fields. This is where you keep all the rest of them? Correct. We get milk from these big cows. They're called moosols, or sun cows, as the humans might call them. I imagine you had some of these back on Earth? Ham shook his head back and forth. No, there was no such creature as this back on Earth. But I imagine this is maybe spawned from those creatures, so All small alterations over time. Nothing to be worried about. Of course, shouldn't call it a small alteration considering this thing's size. The elf beamed proudly. Yes, these herds are our pride and joy. The entire land is now being used to occupy different forms of grazing animal. And even if the animals don't necessarily do grazing, we still house them for all of their useful purposes on this land. All of their scratching at the dirt, their rooting through, their digging, or just leaving their droppings and waste enrich the soil once more for planting to come about again in the next phase. So it's all on rotation. First you cut down the trees, or move them over to wherever they need to go, till the soil, and then grow for a few years. When it's time to rotate, that same land becomes a cow pasture, or occupying these giant moose holes. And then what's after that? Once again, the elf beamed brightly. Then comes the second phase of planting, and that can last, again, 3 to 10 years depending upon what we say things are looking like. Moving forward is an entire city endeavor, and everyone has to do it in unison, so that the soil isn't mistreated or mismanaged. And if your year is bad, or you feel like maybe your land shouldn't move on just right away, well, that's your problem. You still need to either change what you're doing or sell it off. Most elves, though, don't have that big of a problem. They just consider it as part of life. I hadn't thought about that, said Ham. He looked around at the open fields. Occasionally there was a small farmhouse. The elves that live out here in the farmlands, they just get up and move or change their professions, huh? Yes, confirmed the Duchess, but it's not that big a deal. It's the lifestyle they've chosen, and many of the houses in their particular ring are about the same. Ring? You mean like ring going outward from their main city area? That is correct, said the Duchess. Typically, if you're really smart, you'll want a duplicate of your own home in every single area around the ring of the same circumference of the city. Then you buy and sell your homes based upon what you need, and you just try to upkeep it and keep things the way you like them, if you can. While occupied by other elves, there might be small changes, but for the most part, everything stays about the same. Ruby the Synth couldn't help but join the conversation. I myself was responsible for moving much of the produce of these sort of production areas up to the various rings above. And I must say, we did an excellent job, and the elves are very helpful in that endeavor. Well, I would certainly say so. They're twice the size of humans. They should be able to lift some things, replied Ham. As they came up to the next area, the Duchess pointed at the lush green grass. After 3 eras of growing, housing animals, and then growing again, it's time to let the land take a small rest. To that end, we just plant grass and occupy the land only in an artistic quality. She pointed at several statues and features. The land itself was dug up and sculpted. Lakes were added, ponds, rivers, and streams. As far as he could tell, the only thing this land was used for was to occupy the elves' free time. They played sports where they threw large objects, and were doing things much the way Ham would expect in a public park. I see. He couldn't help but notice many of the statues and sculptures that the elves had made seemed to be crafted out of reclaimed nutrient tiles. Oh, really? The Duchess pointed at an elf who was getting ready to throw an incredibly large, spherical object. The object was nothing more than a large boulder that had been shaped to be a perfect sphere. She was getting ready to throw it across a field at some pots. This here is a throwing competition we have. She must be practicing for one. The goal is accuracy, distance, and then penetration. The elf then picked up the large sphere and hurled it straight up into the air. That's accuracy. Her goal is to throw the sphere high up and have it land directly on one of those pots. A moment later, the elf picked up another heavy sphere and threw it straight long ways, as far as she physically could. That one's for distance. The next one she'll be throwing for penetration requires a setup of multiple pots in a row, in which she has to shatter as many as possible without the object becoming deflected. And as for the size of the projectile, that's usually up to the discretion of the judges or the elf. The Navy members were talking back and forth about the seriousness of this situation, as they were calculating what it took to get that ball moving from one side of the field to the other. They were making hand gestures suggesting a worried expression on their faces, but they were trying to keep their cards close to their chest and not react too much. Bo, or BO3, along with the first throne, had picked up some heavy weights that were available for an open outside training area and were now lifting them, giving themselves some exercise. "It's a very nice place, I'll give you that," said Ham. He relaxed a bit as they continued to walk to the next area. "Abandonment!" shouted the elven sheriff, along with the mayor, who was shaking her head up and down. The mayor then leaned over towards Ham. "This is my favorite phase. I love coming out here." Ham looked around. It looked exactly the same as the sporting area, except everything was in a dilapidated state. The large statues now had plants growing slightly underneath their glazing, sucking the nutrients out of the reclaimed nutrient tile beneath. All of the sporting arenas were now completely abandoned, and anything of value had been stripped of the land and taken away. Trees were beginning to grow along with bushes and shrubs, and he saw the occasional wild animal. "This is where, I'm betting, you put various large trees and stuff, and then you let everything age. It's slowly becoming the next area, which is thicket and woodland. Am I correct?" The elves smiled and shook their head up and down. "Yep. That's not a process that we can do. It's a process that has to happen on its own. So this is the abandoned area, where you're free to walk and take leisurely strolls, if things haven't grown up that much, and we don't do any maintenance on anything out here. Even the roads themselves are meant to just sit here and rot. After all, nature likes to find its own path and own way of doing things, and we elves try to not interfere with that. Eventually, everything here will grow up and become thick again, and eventually a different elf will purchase the land in order to hunt and gather upon it, and the cycle then completes its circle and begins anew all over again." So the entire cycle, in its full completion, could take upwards up to 100 years, or as little as maybe 30 or 40 years, depending upon how you guys are feeling. "That is correct," said the Duchess. Ham shook his head up and down enthusiastically. "This is probably the first thing on the ship I've truly, deeply approved of. This is what we were going for." The elves were excited by Ham's approval and placed their hands together in the form of a ring symbol. Ham disregarded the symbol but continued to shake his head up and down in approval. "You see, it was always intended for the people of this ship to be farmers, pioneers, people who could go out and claim new lands. You're meant to be pilgrims, venturing into the new open world and claiming it as your own. And you've done exactly that here. I can't wait to see what you elves can do on the planet below. It's gonna be amazing." The elves clapped their hands and jumped up and down. The mayor had forgot about Ham's personal gravity field and sent herself up a little too high, falling back down on her butt on the ground. "Right," said Ham. He extended his hand downward in the attempt to pick up the elf from the ground, but then quickly realized she was much too heavy for him to lift. "Oh. I need to turn down the gravity entire ring wide in order for this part of the ship to land correctly, but that might cause a little bit of a panic, so we're probably going to have to do some kind of broadcast." Ham looked up at Pangaea, who was following closely behind. "Pangaea, how are things looking ring wide? Are all the repairs complete?" Pangaea took a moment to think about it. "I do have some stuff for you to approve, but I would say we are actually nearing the end. we could probably go ahead and turn down the gravity without too much of any unforeseen circumstances. There was just some stuff we had to weld here and there, some things that needed fixed. You can see it all on your eyes right now. Ham used his neural implant and looked at some of the repairs. There was only one or two things he had a critique about, a couple of things that he wanted redone. But it was quickly all approved, and then Ham could give Pangaea the order. But first, he had to make an announcement. Pangaea carefully knelt down and took a hard look at Ham's face. Then, Ham's face began to appear in the sky. He was always impressed by this projector technology and didn't completely understand how it worked. Like a rainbow, it was based upon where the viewer was looking. It was always projected for the individual viewer, and if two people were asked exactly where the image was coming from, they would have a slightly different interpretation as to what they were looking at in the sky, but they would all see the same image. They would all see it as well from the same angle, looking directly at them. It was truly a marvel of technology to behold, and Ham was grateful that he could use it. "Hello, people of Ring 4, Ham said. "I'm not really certain how to tell you all this without you freaking out, but I'm going to have to turn down the gravity just a little bit on this ring so that we can land properly. I'm going to turn it into the same gravity that you're going to experience on the planet below. So this is going to be the level of gravity you experience for your entire lives. I'm sorry if this is a little uncomfortable for you, but you're just going to have to get used to it." Ham, in a comforting gesture, tried to make the ring symbol that all of the elves were making, showing him their religious devotion. When he did so, the elves, ring-wide, all cheered and clapped in celebration. Some of them even began to strip off some of their clothing to be more attuned with the environment around them. Ham triple-checked everything on his personal device as fast as he could. Then, he shook his head up and down. "Okay, Pangaea, here goes nothing. Go ahead and put the brakes on this thing." Ham suddenly felt a deep rumble traveling through the ground. All of the elves had to grab onto something as it felt as though an earthquake was shaking the very ground they were standing upon. A couple of buildings even had a couple of problems. Roofs collapsed, walls fell over, and the entire ring began to slow its constant rotation. "How about a little gentler next time, Pangaea? Sorry, Ham, things aren't quite working right on this ring, and this is about as gentle as I can be. This entire ship is a little bit past its prime, if you didn't know." "All right then," he said. Eventually, his personal gravity distortion turned off, and the gravity plates shut down. The entire ring was now in normal Earth's gravity. An elf, an elderly one at that, who was standing hunched over with a cane in her hands, suddenly found herself able to stand upright once more. She dropped the cane to the ground, her knees no longer harmed under the intense gravity. "Well, would you look at that?" she said as she started to dance in the street. Elves looking on began to celebrate around her. Now that the ring was moving slower, a lot of the animals began to move more briskly against the ground. They jumped over fences and began running much faster than they did before. "Oh yeah," Ham said. "That'd be a side effect of the lower gravity. All of the animals are suddenly free to really let loose. Hope that doesn't cause too many problems." Ham then looked at his personal device and saw a couple of flashing lights. "Well, looks like there's a few problems revealed by the sudden unapplication of gravity. One or two things finally able to go where before they couldn't. But it doesn't look like anything the synths can't fix real fast. Looks like I'm finally done. We're ready to land the ship. All we have to do is take a quick breather and everything will be perfectly fine." Ham gave himself 1 or 2 hours of break before moving on to the rest of the ship. But as he was taking his break, he noticed a large number of carriages on the horizon. Some were being pulled by the large cow creatures he had seen, others were being pulled by even larger horses, and some were billowing out compressed air, self-automated carriages trundling down the carriageway. All of them stopped in front of the city, and elves enthusiastically began exiting the carriages to approach Ham, shaking his hand and saying hello. They were the various elven leadership of cities both far and wide, and although the structure of each elven city was very much the same, a mayor, a sheriff, and a duchess, the culture of each elven city was vastly different. Some had skin as black as the night sky, with freckles a crisp white. These were called void elves. There were also dark elves, who had darker skin and lighter hair color than the void elves. And then so on and so forth. There were elves in green and elves in blue, and elves with orange and red hair. As far as every color you could imagine, there seemed to be an elf in that variant. There were even a few elves that they nicknamed demonic elves for the protrusion of small horns atop their head. But they were simply mixed elves with fae species, elves that had wandered into Ring 3 and had canoodled a bit with the local wildlife. All of them were excited to see Ham. The archivists were especially excited to see all the variations in different types of elves. They counted night elves, void elves, light elves, even elves that glow in the dark, their skin a luminant glow. Many of them, such as Marty Jones, were struggling to record everything they were seeing, lamenting their inability to take down notes fast enough to keep up with all the different variations before them. The Navy had mostly sat down and calmed themselves in approval. The two Navy gentlemen sent to protect Ham on his journey had agreed that these people were so peaceful and so kind that there was little threat that they posed to the Navy whatsoever, although their physical attributes and abilities were certainly to behold. They would just not be the sort of people to pick up arms against them. It was at this time that Ham noticed a little something in the wind. One of the elves was dressed only in beads, wrapped around her waist and hanging down all the way below her knees. These beads parted only slightly, only for a moment, as she brushed against the wind, moved her hips in ever so a rhythmic fashion to allow the beads to part for just a moment, allowing Ham to take a glimpse of something that was resting below. "Excuse me, madam," Ham said. Could you hold still for a second?" "Oh yes, of course. What can I do for you, Mr. Ham?" "I don't mean any offense towards you, madam, but would it be possible for me to pass through this little curtain you have here and just take a peek underneath for just a moment?" "It would be my greatest honor," she said. She then stood with a much wider-legged stance and held still, while Ham took a deep breath and parted through the beads for a moment. The Navy gentlemen hit each other back and forth and pointed at what Ham was doing. "You getting a good look at whatever's on there, you nasty pervert?" They laughed back and forth. Ham stood under there for longer than they were expecting. When he came back out, he had a definite look on his face. The elf was now deep in blush, despite her already red skin. "Yep," said Ham. "There's gonna be a war." The Navy gentleman looked back and forth. "Huh?" Ham shook his head up and down. "There's gonna be a war. I hadn't noticed it before in the hours and hours we've been here, but every single elf here is a woman. Have you guys noticed that?" The two men looked at each other. "Oh yeah, they are all women. Well, that's not too bad." "Yeah," said Ham, "but I've also noticed that elves don't exactly seem to be paired up with each other too much." "Excuse me, madam," he said, pointing up to the woman with beads. "Do you have a romantic partner?" She shook her head back and forth. "No, romance really isn't my sort of thing. Only maybe 1 in 100 elves can really feel a romantic connection with another elf. It's a very rare phenomena. But we do breed, we may have babies. I have 2 children, actually." Ham shook his head up and down. "Yes, do you think you ever could have a romantic partner?" Immediately, the elf's face began to blush again. "Oh, well, if a human were to ask me, I suppose I could." Ham looked around at all the elves looking on at him. All of them at the question of being romantic with a human began to blush. "Yeah, that right there. That there, I think, is what's going to cause the war. The Navy boys began to lift their eyebrows back and forth. What's going on with this? They asked. Marty Jones, the astute author, immediately lifted up his head. It's exactly as I theorized. According to Elven history, there used to be a large number of humans on this ring, and elves felt a very deep attraction to those humans. Within only a couple of generations' time, there were no more humans left. I wondered why that was. It is because the elves have an altered chromosome on the other side of the chromosomal pair, meaning that the only chromosomes that could possibly connect together is this new F chromosome and the X chromosome, leaving off the other X and the Y. So, if that's the case, then the only possible pairing between an elf and a human, the only possible reproductive possibility, is an elf. Isn't that interesting? Both the Navy gentlemen looked each other back and forth. Well, that might be a bit of a problem, but I don't see how that could start a war. So what? They're elven women, and if you get with one, you end up making an elf. That just makes total sense to me. Hehehe, Ham laughed. It isn't only if a man chooses an elven woman, it's if a woman chooses an elven woman. You might want to take a closer look underneath this skirt here. Ham was giggling to himself. The two Navy gentlemen walked up to the miss. Madam, you wouldn't be offended if we were to take a look under there. Oh, I don't mind at all. With one hand, she immediately grabbed the beads and threw them to the ground, revealing to everyone what was underneath. None of the elves around her reacted at all. After all, outside the nursery was an adult Arius, so there was no harm in being nude. Ham pointed at the elf. Yeah, that thing did not fit in my mouth at all. BO3's head perked up from where he was far away lifting weights with the first throne. Did you hear that? No, I didn't. Moving back over to the scene with Ham, he was laughing. Yeah, you ever heard of a pig in a blanket? That there's a whale wrapped in a circus tent, he said, smiling. Everyone around them was shocked as they looked on at the naked elf. What's the matter? She asked. No, nothing, said Ham, as he moved closer to the Navy boys. Now tell me honestly, if all of the elves who are heterosexual are attracted to humans, and that disproportionate thing is what they have between their legs, doesn't that mean that they're going to have to propose that to a human, and how are all of them going to react if they're turned down? The Navy gentlemen stopped for a moment to clarify in their own minds. Oh God, there's going to be a war. Yep, there's going to be a war, said Ham, for the dumbest reason possible. Oh, I'm loving this adventure. Vicky, who had only just joined the small conversation Ham and the two Navy gentlemen were having along with Marty Jones, looked on at the elf who had just discarded her beads and was now standing there in full naked glory for all to see. She immediately lit up in her eyes. Would any of the elves like to join the Archivist Church? I think you all would do really good around me personally. The second throne gave her a small boop on the head with her finger. Now, don't be so crude. Ham had gotten his fun and decided to move on with his job. Well, I guess all that's left is to have an announcement across the entire ship that we're going to get ready to land soon. Everyone needs to get back to their city cell that they're willing to go down to the planet in, and everyone has to stay away from those big red lines casting from the sky. That's where the ship is going to do something really dangerous, and you don't want to be in those zones. Across all 4 rings, everyone looked up into the sky to see Ham's face once more. Hello, everyone, he greeted happily. My job is finally almost over. I've managed to fix all of the various problems around the ship. I've had shit in my mouth way too many times to count. I've vomited way too many times to count, and I've had to deal with all of your bullcrap on and off that you keep throwing at me. But guess what? None of that matters, and I forgive you all, because I get to put you down on the planet below. And then after that, we never have to speak to each other ever again, and I become completely irrelevant. Which was my goal in this entire endeavor. So if you could all just get along for a couple of days, grab any of the supplies you need, and move to the core of your city's centers for safety, and stay away from those huge red lines around the edges of your various districts, that would be fantastic. Trust me, you don't want to be anywhere near those red lines during the landing procedure. This adventure has been, well, I'll put it simply, terrible, and I can't imagine any of you are going to get along with each other, so before I get off, I'm going to let you look at some glimpses of what you have in store for you from the various other rings. I hope you all learn to get along, and this is me signing off. With that farewell, Ham began to play footage from the various synths' eyes. They were looking around at the rings that they were still on. Some of the people from Ring 1 were looking on at the various rings, such as Ring 3 and Ring 4. They saw what they viewed to be monsters, creatures in the night, and strange elven women walking inside of strange towns, picking fruit and moving farm equipment. The elves looked back at members of Ring 2, living in squalor and dismal disarray, killing each other, blood on the street and dead bodies laying from here to here, the effects of war and pestilence upon the land. They were shocked, covering their mouths. "What has happened? What is going on?" they asked. It felt as though everyone had questions, and no one was giving them good answers. Everyone was wondering what this meant for life upon the planet below. Would they be able to get along with each other? Would they be able to strive for a better tomorrow, or would they simply just clash with each other's ideals? Of course, the answer was obvious, if Ring 1 and Ring 2 was any indication. Deep in the underground confines of a singular building that was now missing its roof, several military gentlemen were now sitting at a table together. They wore red scarves, indications of their allegiance to the missionary party. "We cannot let this happen," they said. "If the ship lands now, with us in random locations, skitter-scattered and leaderless, we will have no control." "I'm aware of that," another one of them replied. "But look, how are we going to lead without any leadership? We don't have anyone who actually has the connection to all the various missionary party groups to get them moving on any sort of offensive. We're completely on the defensive right now, and the Navy is taking us out one little cell at a time." "Well, you're looking at the leadership. Right here, we are the leadership. We're the highest commanding officers, and we can still do things for the mission." "But what about the missionary proper and all that? What about our highest levels being taken out?" "Well, forget all that," they said. "I believe in the cause, you believe in the cause, we all believe in the cause, so let's do it. Don't you want that dojo? I know for a fact I want my tailor shop, and I want it with government benefits so that I don't have to worry about competition. We can do this. We can land all the people where they were meant to be landed. We can take over the ship, and sure, we'll have to forego landing for maybe a year or a month, but who cares? We can get this captain fella out of his throne, and we can be the ones to take charge. It's just a mutiny, after all. Let's do it. One final offensive. What do you all say?" All of the various men picked up the red flag that they were holding. They looked at its yellow stars, its hammer, its whip. They knew what it meant to them to hold that symbol. "Yeah, one final offensive. I'll put the word out and we'll see what we can gather. We still have some military depots and we still have plenty of loyal people. It's just they need to be told what to do in order to get moving. I think I can get them moving." "Hell yeah. Hell yeah," he said as he looked back and forth at the various people around him. "Let's do this thing. For the missionary party. For the mission. It's for humanity's best interest." They all shook their heads up and down. For humanity. End of Chapter 9. Thank you all so much for listening, those of you who have listened all the way to this point. I hope you enjoyed the content I've been producing for you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That helps me a lot with knowing what kind of content to make in the future, and it helps a lot with spreading this story far and wide so that everyone has their chance to decide whether or not they like it. Do not forget to give a lot of love and affection to the artists who worked so hard to bring fun visuals in color for you to see before you on the screen while listening to the story, or even if you didn't see the images because you were listening on the treadmill. I still hope you pay all the respect to the artists who worked so hard for me to bring my nutty story into reality. Thank you very much for watching, and for now, I'm going to have to say goodbye.